What is going on, Bills fans? Lance Nelson here, president of Built in Buffalo, alongside Kevin Massare. Kevin, how are you doing tonight, brother? Pretty good effort out there from the Buffalo Bills tonight.
Yeah, feeling extra good. That defense is about what I'd expecting. The D line dominating ones on ones, ones on twos, twos on twos. The D line having their way pretty much with everything, minus a couple scrambles by Justin Fields. You got to be pretty excited about what the defense could have in store. They got a couple tricks up their sleeves with what we might see personnel wise, but I'm definitely pretty encouraged keeping them to 3.9 yards per carry. Majority of that being 42 of their 106 rushing yards being from Justin Fields. A couple, I think you had a big play to Des Fitzpatrick that was basically a sack toss up by Justin Fields. Other than that, I mean, I've got zero complaints with how that defense played from start to finish. I'm pretty excited about what's in store for this defense, how it looked. I like the aggressive nature of Bobby Babich Jr. and what he was able to do here tonight. Ultimately, all around, I mean, I can't really complain about 9-3 where you really don't give up much. I mean, 200 yards on by them, and they're playing their ones pretty deep, including what could have been their starting quarterback possibly, and that kind of performance is impressive.
Yeah, for sure. I think, shout out to Joe Andreessen, the Lancaster native here, going out and, you know, stepping into a role where, Bills obviously lose Matt Milano this week, and Andreessen comes out and provides that spark for this team and really takes care of business. I thought he really didn't show a ton of sideline to sideline in the first game against the Bears, but tonight was fantastic. Strung guys out, the read options and things like that. He read very well. I think the Bills were fooled a lot by misdirection week one of the preseason, but on this game, they seem to, keep their integrity and things like that a lot more and show that they were able to, be in the position they need to be in more often. There were obviously times where they got hooked at the edge and things like that where you wouldn't want them to, but those are also, maybe fifth depth chart guys on the DNs and things like that. The starters played really well. Javon Solomon had a bull rush that was impressive. Obviously, Gregory Rousseau lit it up when he was in there and definitely did his thing. Didn't see a ton. I'll have to go back and watch what AJ Epinesa did. He didn't have necessarily the stat packed game or something where he heard his name too often, but wasn't necessarily a liability out there either. So overall, I thought this defense played well. Cam Lewis started at safety, so that was a little bit of a surprise. Obviously, Hamlin got the injury Thursday and wasn't able to go in this game. So tell us a little bit about the personnel wise and things. I think I know that you really like Corey Couch, and he had a nice pass breakup on fourth down there. And then Hardy playing outside cornerback with Jamarcus Ingram playing the nickel. Something I'm not sure we expected at the outset of the preseason here, but something they've kind of went to now. And just talk a little bit about how you saw people in their spots and basically Hardy now solidifying himself with that return role. I thought he did really well with that. So given that ability, I think Hardy definitely puts himself on this roster.
I think there's a couple things you can take away from it. I love when teams, and most notably the Bills in our case, play their twos. I think that's an impressive style of way to treat your preseason where you're going to give your ones a little bit of time, but then you're not going to waste meaningful 3 games worth of snaps anymore. You had the 4th game before. That game could have been for whoever you wanted it to be for. But the way that it's built now with the 3 preseason games, I just don't like burning snaps on guys that you don't think are going to make your roster, whether you're a fan, an analyst, a podcaster, in media, or a coach. I'm bored of that kind of play, but I really love the way the Bills played this game, how they played their personnel. Obviously, you would prefer to have another quarterback in there that isn't a guy that was here 5 days ago, and Ben DiNucci just did not seem to know how to run the offense yet. I don't think he was going to play much at all tonight, previous to the Trubisky injury. But if you look at it from the defensive perspective, that was not to the standards. It was preseason, but that was one of the worst preseason games I've seen. The wind was crazy from everything I've heard. It was whipping. It was just like they didn't want to be there. There wasn't much you could do. Then leading into this game, I was really impressed by the defensive personnel. I mean, it looked like Dorian Williams and Joe Andreessen were the Bills starting linebackers. You wouldn't have fooled me that they're basically linebacker 3 and 6. I would not have guessed that. I mean, maybe even 3 and 7, depending on how you want to build the depth chart out. But they looked every bit as much as 1 and 2. And now you add, Terrell Bernard, Von Miller to this defense. You had some competent safety play. The one thing I'm not ever concerned with Lance and their personnel packages is they will find the right safeties. You can knock McDermott for whatever you think he sucks at. But one thing he does not suck at, and the guy you just mentioned is Daquan Hardy. I mean, he's going to get snaps at some point this year. Struggled a little bit against the run kind of late in the game. Outside of that, though, his coverage ability, what he can do on teams, I mean, special player for his size. I mean, he's not like tiny like Nicole Roby-Coleman. He's just kind of smaller. And then he kind of just figure he's like 5'7" or something. But he's able to hold his own, and he's out there covering pretty decent players. We got his hands on a couple balls, definitely on the roster. I can't see a way where he would ever waive that guy. He would get claimed. I mean, he would definitely be a guy that's claimed pretty immediately. But the way what he's able to do across, he's spry, he's speedy. He's every bit as much as that 5'9", but 180. Kind of reminds you of Taron Johnson and every bit of the way you're thinking of. And just really liking the way he can bounce outside. Had a great game, but you can't go and forgetting not mentioning Jamarcus Ingram, a guy that I thought was on the roster, but him and Hardy pretty much solidified that cornerback battle, just pretty much locked that up. Ingram can play teams. He's locking up boundaries. I thought he had amazing coverage on one of the best, George Pickens, one of the best receivers last year in terms of what he was able to do. I mean, the Bills.
I was impressed the way he kept them on the sideline on that play, and Pickens obviously thought he called it, but I mean, it's really solid coverage for the guy who's 5th cornerback on this roster.
Yeah, seemingly started about corner 10 when he came into this league, pushed his way up to like practice squad corner 7 last year. Now, he's now probably him and Hardy are, jockeying for that cornerback 5. I mean, it was originally thought of that he is boundary corner 4 or corner 5 in general. But with Hardy right there, I think you roster both of them. You can't waive either of them with how in demand that position is. I think those are some of your 2 final guys on the roster so far. But that cornerback room with Rasul Douglas, Taron Johnson, Christian Benford, I've got no issues with it. I know everyone wanted some flashy, I guess, veteran addition there, including my co-host wanted another veteran corner. I just can't see it with how well you need these roster spots to go to Hardy and what he can do on teams, and Ingram and what he can do on teams. Then obviously Kyer Elam. I think it's a pretty locked in 6 cornerbacks, Lance.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about, Brandon Beane has a plan last night on the Triple Coverage podcast. And I thought that's, interesting. We don't have to get into all that because we're kind of just reacting to the game now, but we'll save that. And you can maybe go into that on Going Deep on Wednesday as to, what you think that plan is and all that. But definitely didn't have too many negative notes. Like I said, AJ Epinesa wasn't necessarily showing out. Someone asked about Deion Jones here. Did you see anything from him you liked or didn't like? I didn't think he definitely. It's weird to kind of see him as a veteran playing such a, so deep into the preseason games. I thought maybe he would have got some run earlier on, but just not seemingly doing. I don't know. Maybe he's just he is a veteran presence and one of those guys that they may need, or they may be looking to part ways with towards the end of preseason if they've got these other guys, young guys stepping up because they really want to focus on this youth.
Yeah, I think what was shocking to me was that I just figured it would be Bernard and Dorian Williams at linebacker for a pretty decent portion. Then once they saw the weather elements and were like, Bernard's really important to this defense, I just thought it was for sure going to be Dorian Williams and Deion Jones going to play a majority of the day. That's what I would have guessed if I was on a pregame show. But the shock of Andreessen basically starting over everybody else, everyone will tell me, well, Morrow's hurt and Balin Spector's hurt, and that may be true. But it's also true, right? Meaning that he played himself into the role of like, that's a guy that put a lot of tape out there. Linebacker is definitely a position we've seen claimed in the past. Linebacker, O-line, corner. Those positions are claimed more than your favorite receiver or running back, believe it or not. So like everyone's talking about like, how could we let this receiver go? I think the bigger positions where people can translate is that linebacker, that corner, that almost always are going to get claimed. So to me, I just don't know with that film he just put out there, how Andreessen wouldn't get claimed by whether it's a team needy at linebacker or a worse team in the league. I just don't think you can send him through to waivers. I think it would be great to have somebody, a veteran linebacker that you think could make it through to waivers. But him playing over Olafosio was a big deal. I just ultimately, when it's all said and done, Deion Jones has flashed. They have some difficult decisions at the linebacker room. They did make it better preparing for if something was to happen to either Milano and Bernard. And since we've had the injury to Bernard or to Milano, the Bills have had to adjust, but they have the depth there. The linebacking room looked great tonight. And I'm pretty impressed by what they put on the field. And if you got a guy like Andreessen, $795K, the benefits there, Lance, are astronomical. He's definitely a guy you put on your roster. You can play in an emergency, play on special teams, but he's got the Carolina game now to make a roster.
Yeah, really well said. And then let's go over to the offense, I guess. And we'll take a couple questions, I guess, here. I don't know if you want to give your thoughts. Do you see Josh playing on Kids Day next week against the Panthers, or is his preseason pretty well set?
I didn't. They did last year after a bad Steelers game. It was kind of reversed. Like last year, they played a pretty bad Steelers game last year, leading them to play into the third week. This year, I wouldn't be shocked to just hang it up, man. They aired it safe today, which was the right call. Had they known Trubisky would have gotten hurt in that game, they may have actually probably played Josh a little bit just to get some offense. But the problem is if Trubisky's hurt, you can't run DiNucci out. You need some of this offensive guy. So if Trubisky is hurt longer than like a week or two, you got to play Josh. You got to actually get these weapons quarterback. You can't get a guy off the street to come in anyways, Lance.
That's what we're talking about. Like, how the heck do you even evaluate these receivers and things? Because Trubisky is bad. He just,
I'm worried about
that. Mean, he's happy feet back there when there's not pressure, and it just doesn't look very good for him at most of the time. Had some throws and was able to find Quentin Morris a couple of times, which was nice. And then your guy, Davidson, got free on a nice in and out route there. I thought he, had a good route. I liked the route that Valdez Scantling ran as well, but Mitch threw it or DiNucci maybe was in at that point, but they threw it so late that kind of caused that injury to MVS too. It was just the ball coming out so late and not getting there at the right part of the route. I thought put him in harm's way. So people asking about Shavers running late into the fourth. These guys are at the bottom end of the depth chart here when it comes to wide receiver. So yeah, he may. Especially if we didn't see Hamler at all really, but if they do value him in any way, not sure what that means anymore for Tyrell Shavers. But the good thing about the offense, will be positive here, is that the offensive line really seemed to find their groove, had a lot of energy. There was a couple of false starts here and there. I know it did seem to me like 64 had a little bit of trouble today, and that he allowed a guy to get right through and kind of cause the sack early on Trubisky, and then luckily James Cook broke a tackle after he got beat on the very next play, and that didn't end up in a loss. And then Spencer Brown with one false start there. Stuff's going to get cleaned up, and they just need the reps for it. So I'm not overly concerned about any of those mistakes necessarily, but Cyrus Torrence, not his best day probably on film, and we'll have to go out look at that. But otherwise, the running backs did have room, or they at least made people miss and found the room to get some running yards here, unlike last week. So Ray Davis was electric. They gave him the ball 6 times in a row to start the second half, and he got it all the way down inside the 20. Inside the 10 really, and then there's a penalty that kind of derails that drive there. But overall, I was pretty happy with the running backs and the running game, which is what we wanted to see, although what the team needs is probably to see a little bit more of what the receivers can do.
Yeah, so that's why maybe I would err on Josh playing, but it's just too important. So I don't know how they're going to play it. If Trubisky can't play, they almost have to play Josh, but Josh isn't going to play with some of those guys that we need to see anyways. So it's like I don't know what they do. I mean, it's best that the team has Trubisky ready. Like as much as he struggled again, not making the wrong decisions and when to take a sack and when not to, like just taking some terrible sacks, but at the same time deciding to press it at the wrong time too. So I just like, what do you do? What do you tell? You can't tell him to not take a sack, but then that's the outcome when he overthrows somebody. So it's really a difficult scenario, when he's trying to find Quentin Morris on the field. Who's also looked like he came out with a shoulder injury. So we're going to have to watch that. I think it's best for this team that Trubisky's ready to go next week, just because we do need to see them. And because if Danucci's playing, he's not going to be able to complete anything. They can't bring in a quarterback at this stage. You can't play Josh Allen into, the second with some of these guys. I don't know what they can do. Like ultimately they're going to have to rely on practice. And some of the final decisions are going to be made not with preseason games when it comes to the offensive skill players. So I think they feel fairly confident on who their starters are and what the starters can do. But we're not going to see those fringe battles like we were hoping for out of the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th wide receivers. And I don't buy the Shavers hype. I'm not. I just think that's a practice squad guy. That's just what I've thought and how I feel it. I thought maybe he'd prove me wrong. I don't know how he could have proved me right or wrong in the last 2 games anyways. But ultimately that's just a guy that you can put on your practice squad. Like I just have no worries that he would ever get claimed.
Yeah. Injuries, Valdez-Scantling gets a neck injury, Mitchell Trubisky with a knee, Austin Johnson has a calf, Quentin Morris a shoulder, as you mentioned, and then Solomon came up with a calf injury there late in the game.
Why was he playing
hate
late?
to see that, so we'll have to see what that was. And as good as he was playing, I don't really understand. Maybe Klein or one of those guys just needed the breath, but I would have liked to just see Bothroyd or somebody else get in there and just take those snaps, and let Solomon have his night the way it was. I thought he just did enough where it's like, okay, kid, you can sit down. You've shown us, enough. I was impressed. He's using those long arms, and given that he doesn't have a lot of length, I think those long arms still present a big problem for offensive linemen, and he's able to use them pretty well. Placement and leverage, to me, stand out. I thought that was impressive to see a guy of his stature use more of a, maybe an up and under, but it's kind of that first bull rush interaction with the offensive lineman was pretty impressive. The way he got him off balance. So, unfortunate for some of these injuries. Anything like, what do you have else on the offense maybe that you want to detail for us?
Yeah.
I guess we kind of went pretty deep on the defense. I think we said a lot about what we saw there. I think Kyron Brown had a tough day on defense. I'll just say that as one last thing. But on offensively, I kind of gave my thoughts there as well, with Torrance being a little bit rough, Brown having a penalty, and otherwise I was pretty happy with what we saw.
Yeah, you saw Trey McKitty playing a lot too in blocking situations. He's. I mean, I think they'd be trying to work him in. Definitely, probably on the practice squad. But I saw him play a little bit more in certain packages than I would have thought.
Had a
They're gonna.
holding penalty on that as well.
Yep. Yeah, I thought it was a weak call. I mean, I think it was Steve Tasker pointed out. Like, I mean, a tiny grab. He's through the line. It didn't really affect the play. It's a bad call. Ultimately, most of it's been fine, but that just didn't need to be called, in my opinion. But what they were trying to do with him, and I think what they succeeded at, is running that 12 personnel. I just think there may be a way that they work 4 tight ends on this roster, and then put McKitty onto the practice squad. I just don't think that you need to stash a Shavers. I think he's destined for the practice squad. But what I saw all around, I thought the O-line was good. I loved kind of how I started with the Hulk 2's comment I made. Tylen Grable's playing really well. You have Alec Anderson that's need to move around. You saw Van Pran Granger, Lael Collins, Ryan Vandemark. I've been fine with Lael Collins, by the way. I know in our spaces we were concerned at him.
Yeah.
He's every bit as much as a number 7 offensive lineman on a roster. Like, look, he's not an upper end top 3 guy, best guard in the league. He is a 7th or 8th offensive lineman on a roster that will be active on game days. I don't think he's played how you talk about playing your way onto a roster. I don't think he's played his way off to the roster in this case. Right. I think he's been fine. And definitely probably a guy that they're going to pay and trust to pay and play in certain situations. So I do think he'll end up making the roster, to much chagrin of people. I think he's been fine though. It is even like one of those cases of like Bobby Hart where he's like, God, that guy stinks.
Right.
I think he's been fine. He's shown some weak moments in practice. He was, a little bit, hobbly at times. But Vandermark, Collins, Cedric Van Pran, Granger, Alec Anderson, Tylen Graveman will clap. The six of them playing 5 positions. They've been really solid. Like that number 2 O-line showed up today. Ben DiNucci was able to hand the ball off with ease. Running backs were finding room. 4.9 yards per carry. Ray Davis with that great drive with the 2s. Frank Gore Jr., 41 yards. I mean, ultimately, you don't run for 167 yards even in preseason. That's hard to do when your O-line sucks and the defense knows it's coming. Those situations are usually how it looks on the Steelers end, where they ran for 106 yards and 3.9 yards per carry. That's exactly what I usually expect to see in preseason. It's totally fine. The Steelers, have to go back to the drawing board for that. But in the Bills end, like that's a really good dominant performance by the 2s. And that's where I'm glad they gave those snaps, mostly except for that last drive, really to the entire number 2 unit. And I think that's a strength of the roster. Ultimately, they're going to probably try to keep 10 offensive linemen, 4 tight ends. And Lance, at this stage, I think you keep 5 receivers. I'm sorry. I just think that's what they end up doing.
Yeah, because especially who knows what MVS is gonna happen here now. So you're almost out of option. I kind of was talking about maybe Andy Isabella as an option for his kickoff return ability. I thought he does a nice job over Hamler, but we'll see. I guess maybe one of those guys gets the 5th receiver job now if MBS can't go, and we'll see what happens with that. But
He did
overall,
whisper he's okay when they panned over to him. So I'm hoping, obviously that's just a player saying that maybe he's got adrenaline.
okay.
So I'm hoping that that's short term there. It didn't seem overly serious. I didn't think the DB needed to do that. Like that's what I hate about that. Is one of the players I've seen so far this preseason where I hated it. Like there's just no reason to take a free shot on a receiver in the preseason. Like there's not.
Yeah, I
So
missed it, honestly. I was looking at his legs because I just thought the way after the ball came, I initially thought, okay, ball's coming late, needed to hit him earlier, and then the way his legs kind of buckled underneath him seemed like maybe it was something lower body, and I just kind of missed the hit up high there as the guy came in. But yeah,
yeah,
that's
took a free shot on a receiver. He was pretty much almost stopped. I mean, at least a good solid 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Like, look, I get you're trying to make a roster. That's just a free shot on someone's body. Like so many things, ribs, neck, shoulder, concussion. Like I just don't ever seem to think that's what it's about. But I'm pretty sure that he was thinking that maybe he could force his way into a first down, but ultimately, like, I wouldn't love it if a Bills player did that to someone. I just don't think I'd like that hit very much. I thought he torpedoed in there. What I call a torpedo is when basically his momentum is stopped. It's the freaking preseason. And I guess you could argue the DB didn't know he was that short of the first down. That's fine. But, ultimately he took that shot kind of up in the upper midsection while he was being held up. So not my favorite, especially the DB1 did a really good job. The guy that came in first, I didn't have any problem with that at all. And then the guy that came in second was just hitting him to hit him, which even in the regular season, I don't love, but I'll give it to you because it's important. There, I don't like it at all. I mean, I'm sorry. That's not a good hit to potentially knock out somebody. You're doing nothing there but hurting somebody. Like I ultimately don't think that there's any positive football to be gained there. But ultimately, I think he should be okay. I hope and think that neck injury is okay because he is every bit as much as with Matt Collins as the 4th and 5th receivers. So I think the Bills need him to be okay. Otherwise, if he's not okay, I think you can pretty much lock in 5 receivers. I just think you can put Isabella on the practice squad. You can try to roll in Hamler in there and Shavers. Call it a day and maybe look around the league at that point, Lance.
Well, you do think 4 tight ends. That's interesting. I know you like Davidson, and that would lend itself to giving them those 4 with depending on how serious Quentin Moore's shoulder is. Obviously, having Kincaid and then Knox with Morris and Davidson, who I assume your 4 would be. and not a bad option, especially if they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel. They need to rotate those guys in and out, and uh, Davidson's shown he's a good option in the pass game. I have to go back and look more tape. I didn't see Vandemark stand out specifically. I just didn't watch him. I was trying to focus more towards the interior and see what Alec Anderson and Van Prank Granger were doing in there. But do you have any thoughts on Vandemark, any of the old linemen, I guess? Anybody you want to single out, or any other
Thought they were
offensive
solid.
guys?
Yeah, solid and run. He was solid. He didn't have to play too much pass protection at all. So there's
Right.
not going to be too much film there. But I thought he was solid and run. Like the whole backup unit was really good. So we'll kind of break it down one by one, but as a unit, it was good. And that's what's important to the team, is that they have a whole second unit, and that they can trust each of them in certain roles. I really think that it's like a battle to, like, you probably want to keep Will Clapp. So with no injuries, how do you do that?
Right.
Either you have an IR stash, or you got to hope you waive him and he goes to the practice squad. I mean,
Is Lyle
ultimately,
Collins going to come up with a quad injury or something that late in the preseason here and go on IR? I don't know.
he could, but they'd probably, unfortunately, prefer to be a redshirt year for Cedric Van
Yeah,
Pran Granger.
for sure.
Ultimately, once again, the payment that he's making, they want him to play,
Yeah.
so he'd have to stink. And I wouldn't say I've seen a ton out of him, but I wouldn't say I've seen him stink. So he'd have to stink like OJ Howard stink for him to get off the roster. And I thought he played fairly decent today. I'm pretty uninspired by that Steelers roster. Like, I thought it would
Right.
be like a pressing roster. You could have said the same thing about us last week. And maybe you'd be right, maybe you'd be wrong. I think you'd be wrong. So, but I just didn't ultimately see enough from that Steelers roster to be.
Yeah, I
Like,
think without TJ Watt, their defense looks a lot different too. But I do like Patrick Queen in there. I was kind of hoping the Bills could maybe
yeah,
add a Patrick Queen at some point, but obviously with the emergence of Terrell Bernard, that became less important. And yeah, let's move on to the special teams. I know you don't want to hang out for too long here
yeah, we're
afterwards. I
good.
want to be sensitive to that too. And with the is there anything else on the offense you had before we move on to special teams? I don't have much else. I mean, they were handed the ball off a bunch, 34 runs and 18 pass attempts. So there's not really a lot, again, to say about any sort of weapons. Davidson did have a nice route, have a nice catch. Quentin Morris
Mhm.
caught 2 contested catches I thought that were good. I don't. There's not really much to say about any receivers there. The Bills still haven't found the end zone on offense. Do you think we're going to see a preseason touchdown at all this year? I would think hopefully Kids Day at the stadium here in Orchard Park, we may get one, but so far 5 field goals for Tyler Bass. And so how do you feel? Did today say anything about the kicker or the punter to you? I thought Martin
What
punted well, but um,
with that Carolina roster coming to town, it's just not a very good roster still. They got, another 15-12 game with the Jets today, jumping to 0-2 themselves. So I ultimately think that the Bills will score an offensive touchdown. 1/4 of Josh Allen, where he really only had a drive and a half or two, is not really cause for concern,
right.
especially when 2.5 quarters were from a guy who wasn't on your roster, a guy that got hurt and is now cut, I guess, in Shane Buechele. So, like, ultimately, I'm not overly concerned, and the Bills probably are pretty happy. But I think the whole thing was like Josh played game one so that he could be in more of a rhythm with these guys. So I do think that they'll probably play him. They definitely wouldn't have. It wasn't in the plans. But I think going in, they play him. But with it now getting creepy and closer to opening day, I wouldn't be shocked at just calling it a quarter for Josh Allen. I think they would have preferred for him to have longer than a quarter of preseason, so I could see another quarter. Or if they're really trying to limit it one drive. But then at that point, when you're just doing a drive, I don't know, just give him a warm up workout pregame. I just don't see
Mhm.
enough advantage in one drive to really gain of what could happen. So,
Yeah,
there's definitely some
the
risk
risk is
reward.
always going to be higher than the reward in preseason, especially with a guy like Josh Allen. I mean, you have some guys out there where you may need to get a solid look, some of the offensive linemen, but even that, a lot of the like Deion
Right.
Dawkins being out there and things like, yeah, you have to have him out there to get the cohesiveness with David Edwards now because there is a new left side there, but it's like the risk, obviously, of losing any of one of those guys far outweighs any reward. but it's a little bit of a necessary evil. So you
Right.
can't not play him at all. But I think guys have come out without a preseason before and played good enough. I think does the week one opponent in the Cardinals being maybe yeah, they do have some exciting talent on offense and whatnot, but they're not necessarily the best team in the league. So you do have a little bit of that where if you're coming out rusty week one, you hopefully can just win on talent there. So they may not need to be completely buttoned up and use that more like, okay, it counts and you can get your guys in a rhythm there as well.
Yeah, and you're going to play another team that's only scored 15 points, whose pass catching is that Jordan Matthews and Mike Boone, the running back. You're not going to see a ton of pressure here from the Panthers. So I do think that you may be able to do some things here in this third preseason game. I would like to see them come out and dominate. It remains to be seen what they'll do. But I think when it comes to what you've seen from special teams, I've been fine with it. I just can't take Matt Smiley seriously. There's just still too many penalties on routine plays. The return game always looked kind of decent, but everything else always like I'm just never impressed with his units as a whole. I mean, Daquan Hardy did his job, so that's nice that he probably entrenched himself as the Bills punt returner, which would mean that you can't roster a separate kick returner. So I think Hardy will take that job over, in my opinion. Averaging 52.8, Sam Martin, obviously not that it wasn't already locked in his job after whatever those wins were last week. And ultimately after those wins, the Bills basically just said, we don't care about this Bears game. That's just how they played it. And tonight I did like to see some of that energy was a little bit better. And I'm never worried about Bass inside of 40 ever. Like, I think he's a very solid kicker, and I think he's really good long distance. I really don't have any issues. He just has some of those lapses from like 42 to 48 that he just, for some reason, the power to accuracy combo / to the wind has always kind of bugged him since a rookie year. So, he's always going to have that problem, in my opinion. But he is going to be a guy that in games where you need him, he's going to make field goals under 40 yards. He's not going to be a guy that is going to miss too many of those. He's going to make his extra points. He's going to hit very long field goals. He's just going to have a frustrating miss for no reason. But I guess that's kicking. No one kicks 100%. I mean, it's like anything. Like an 85% kicker is really good. And he generally doesn't miss tying or go-ahead field goals. That's the other thing. So the fact that he did miss one most recently in Bills fans' memory is frustrating. But the Bills feel very confident in what he can do. And he's just got to do a little bit better with certain moments and certain distances. But he'd be an all-pro if he could figure that out, because then he wouldn't miss from anywhere.
Right.
And if you could kick in those Buffalo wins, like, look, they couldn't even play the game last week, in my opinion. They're punting like 25 yards. It looked like a little league game at times. Those the Bears, and the Bears only ran up the score because of like some late, turnover on downs when the Bills were just trying different things. That wasn't really that like a blowout. That was like a 21 points after the last 15 minutes kind of a game. So ultimately, Lance, I'm in pretty good spirits with what I can see from these specialists. I liked what I saw from Kingsley Jonathan, laying the lumber on special teams. Ingram's basically locked up because of special teams. It's going to be interesting to see if there's a guy there that they Bills want to roster because of special teams that we're not talking about, because it is a unit they need to make sure they have buttoned up.
Right.
And they're probably really hoping that Andreessen can make sure he's on the roster by playing that position pretty well, not just lining up next to Dorian Williams or Terrell Bernard. So that's going to actually be his path to the roster is special teams. And if he can do that, I think the Bills will feel fairly good about it. But it's going to be some decisions, and I think some of these final decisions, because of the unit you're talking about here on special teams, where Ingram can do it, Hardy can do it. Those are the guys that we're going to make the rosters. And another underrated sneaky guy is Darrington Evans, is a guy that has been on 3 rosters last year, a guy that people always Miami called him up to the main squad. You had Chicago take him early on. He's a guy that shows juice and flash at times. Speedy back, can play special teams. He's a sneaky guy on everyone's right. He's not a guy I would ever talk about, but he's a guy that like does make rosters. He does show enough at times where he fools people. So I think the Bills, What do they do with all these guys when it comes to special teams? There's going to be someone make the roster solely for that reason.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's hard to tell which, I guess I haven't necessarily paid or been able to pay enough attention to note exactly who is on every special teams unit. Seems like for field goal block or whatnot, they just run whoever's been on defense. They just kept those guys out there, and then kickoff, and kick return. Just plays coming up kind of quick, and just haven't got the notes down on those guys either. So definitely looking to figure that out, and maybe in the third preseason game, I'll be there and be able to get a little bit more on that as well. So yeah, man. Overall, I mean, obviously, very inspired effort from the team tonight. So I'm excited that we don't have to listen to too many people complain this week about it. And obviously, when you go out and lay an egg, that is always cause for concern. But overall, that can happen any week to any team, and I think that's something you do have to watch out for with this team in the regular season. Is if they do come out flat for whatever reason, it could be a long day for them, but they do still have enough talent to where when they come out and they play uh, spirited game, they're gonna be pretty successful at times. And not an overly dominant performance, but I think they controlled the run game enough and just weren't able to punch it in at the end zone. Obviously, towards the end there, it was DiNucci trying to throw something up to Justin Shorter and hit the defensive back in the middle of the numbers in this back. So it's kind of a uninspiring play, and you just can't really expect too much out of DiNucci coming over and not having any really idea of what they're running. So
Yeah, you would think by next game though, like he should be for the whatever amount of quarters he plays, he should be ramped up a little bit better to where he should at least be able to run an offense, especially a preseason offense, knowing that he may play a little bit now, depending on what's going on with Trubisky. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the Bills are going to do at quarterback. I don't know if he's banged up. What if he's banged up 3 to 4 weeks, like basically week 1, week 2 range? Like, what do the Bills do? Like, you don't roll in Ben DiNucci. He's there for camp arm. Like, maybe practice squad if they like him. Like, they need to go out and acquire a quarterback. Like, I'm not kidding. Right. Like, I think that unless it's very minor injury and then he's going to be completely fine, you have
the
to.
Steelers saved Kyle Allen tonight. They didn't play him at all, so maybe they'll give another call about that. I don't know. Surprising that Kyle Allen didn't see any snaps there. But yeah, it's one of the reasons I thought drafting a young quarterback, and my choice would have been Joe Milton, even though he's not anything great or wonderful. It's just a matter of he has a similar skill set to your starter. Put him in behind there and let him sit there for 4 years without any bother, and hopefully he doesn't need to touch the field, but at least he can give you that extra element of mobility that the same way Josh Allen has it, and maybe your team could rally behind that to find some success if there's some time missed by QB1 at all. But they haven't done that yet, and we'll see if they do go out and do it at all to bring in another veteran here, or maybe by next offseason they'll actually go and take one in the draft.
It's not crazy. He's got a $2 million cap hit and he's a $1.5 million dead cap, meaning that like they say $500K by cutting him. They can, I mean, ultimately, like makes more sense than some of the other players we've talked about that they could cut him. Like if he's hurt and he's just not getting it done, like they need to waive him. Like they need to cut him and get somebody in here like ASAP. It's not Ben DiNucci. Like Ben DiNucci, if anything, is destined for maybe the practice squad. If anything, the Bills will probably do what they did last year with Shane Buechele and take a quarterback that is waived and maybe put them on the practice squad. But when it comes to the veteran side, like go get somebody that you think can run but whether it's Kyle Allen, could make sense if they do release him. Like, is it Ryan Tannehill?
I was going to say, is he too expensive, Tannehill?
I don't know. Like, I don't think so. I mean, you run yourself, you're not Justin Simmons. You run yourself into like no money at some point, and that's where he is. Like he's definitely, even if some big quarterback got hurt and he got signed, like he's still running himself. Like he's not going to get too much money. So he can still say like, I want to hold out and wait for a quarterback injury. But it's definitely, that's due to playing time, but it's definitely not going to be a situation where he's ever going to get any sort of money over veteran minimum at this point into August, especially like. But that's the call you make. You see if there's any other veterans. The Bills have traded for guys like Case Keenum before. Who else could be on the market? So I think that depending on the length of this injury, you can't just roster him and guarantee his salary if he's out a certain amount of games into the regular season. Like just move on from him. Like we've talked about it with like every other player when it comes to like Lyle Collins or whoever else may be. But especially at the quarterback position, you got to have a guy that you like if you're Joe Brady, like that may be available. That these teams only roster 2 quarterbacks, and there's definitely teams that have 2 to 3 decent guys that you can make a call to. So that'll be one to play out that I think wasn't going to be one you would have to worry about. But he's been that bad to me, and he's also got a number. Just might make sense to get out of it. Like just get a guy in here that can be competent.
Yeah, I agree. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you jumping on with me here. Is there any other things you want to say about this game? I know there was really not a ton to pick apart with the offense, like I said, because it was just a lot, 34 runs, 18 passes. We didn't get to see a lot of evaluation. The quarterbacks that were in there just weren't necessarily up to par to really give us a good look a lot of the time. I know Keon Coleman had a slant pattern that hit him in the hands, but just a little bit too far out in front of him, I think, to really catch it. And other than that, just not a lot to evaluate there, other than being happy that the push was there up front on both the defensive and offensive lines, and that's really my takeaway. So
yeah, I mean it's ultimately a really good performance by the O and D lines. That's what we got today, and that's what we wanted to see. Like, sure, the next best thing is like a really great game by the skill positions. You just don't see that in preseason. Like, really, if you're trying to work a bunch of receivers, the Bills don't need to do that. Like, you have a quarterback that needs to win a job. That's when you see these receiver performances. Like even like the Steelers could qualify in this, or the Bears, or other teams that are really trying to work in those weapons. The Bills aren't one of those teams. Josh Allen's entrenched. The Chiefs aren't one of those teams. The Bengals, like those are just teams that you're just never going to see much from their weapons. You just don't need to, because you can't risk your starter. And these guys you expect to start and make the roster aren't going to play with Josh anyways. And now they're used to taking reps from Josh. Now they're getting reps from Trubisky. It doesn't work. Right. So ultimately, the teams that you'll see these skill players pop for are these teams that have a quarterback battle, or they rotate through with other quarterbacks, or they're really pressing, like quarterbacks are really doing everything they need to do to make a roster. That's when you see these performances like Joe Milton's. That's why I agree. Like ultimately, I think it's stupid they don't have a $700,000, $800,000 quarterback on the roster. Because there's just too much 4-year benefit to that. And I get it that like, if they go down, like, I don't think Trubisky is going to win many more games than anybody else. So I don't know what the argument is like, but it is more than just, a lot of people always go to how many games would Trubisky win and would he win 2 out of 4? But it always goes down to like, it's more than that. Truly. It's like in the room, can he dissect the defense for Josh? Can he go over it with the iPad? Can they talk about plays, pregame game planning? It's not just what is he going to do if he steps on the field, where a lot of people do think that's what it's about a little bit. It's more so what do they bring to the veteran presence of what you're diagnosing? Are you like, a lot of quarterbacks are really good at that. That doesn't mean they're the world's best quarterback. So we don't really know how good somebody is compared to somebody else at the intangible stuff, but that stuff does seem to matter to Bean. It does seem to matter to Josh. And like just bringing in a guy because he may be a tick better may not be of the Buffalo Bills final fortitude, because they just don't think they'd ever go win more than 2 out of 4 games anyways, if Josh went down. So I just don't think that they care. They want a guy that can talk to Josh in the locker room a certain way, go through things with him that he trusts, what they see. That kind of stuff is like way more important than a rookie that's like promising. So that's what it comes down to for me. And that's why if Trubisky's healthy, there'll be no move. But if he's not healthy, the Bills have some decisions to make, because I don't know how you stash him for like 4 weeks or something. If it's like the knee's kind of concerning, like, is that a 4-week knee injury? Is that a 1-week knee injury? Is it a day-to-day knee injury? Is it a 12-week knee injury? Like, Brandon Beane's got some decisions to make when it comes to that position, because ultimately it is hampering these receivers' development in preseason games. But Lance, They practice every day. Josh Allen knows what he has, but it would be good to get him in a game. And ultimately, that's why they may play him against Carolina, even though I wouldn't. And I just don't think you can go into the regular season with one quarter from Josh Allen. I don't know that that's what their plan
Right.
was.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, he says he didn't need a couple weeks ago. He's saying he doesn't need the preseason at all in his mind, but then he's saying he wants to get in these games, like he said to Matty Glab on the broadcast today. So definitely, either way, I think he's going
He
to be
gave
ready to roll. But I think it'd be
a
better.
sneaky tell, though, which was interesting, where he said to Matty Glab, I don't know if he did it intentionally, where he said, I'm going to joke with Bean about this over the next week and a half, or like about Sean, excuse me. And ultimately it's like, well, aren't you just going to play next week? Like,
Right. Maybe
so
not.
it's like a sneaky, like, I don't think they're going to play him. I think you're going to take a quarter into it. Maybe they want to get him ready, get him in a uniform, get him used to some of his weapons for a series. But at most, it's going to be a quarter in a series. But I think it could end up being a quarter that you see Josh Allen play. And, we're going to have to see a lot of Trubisky. And if he's not healthy, I don't know what to do with next game with Ben DiNucci. I don't know what to do with that game.
How do you do it? Yeah, it's just
I don't know what to do with that game.
You're turning around, handing the ball off, and 60 times.
Good for the O-line. I mean, honestly, seriously, like you got to take something away. It's boring, but it's really good for the O-line. It would hopefully look a lot like tonight. And that's really what the Bills would be hoping for. At least DiNucci will have another week, and he'll have some more pass plays, and he'll have a little bit more chemistry with some of these twos, and maybe be able to do something. But ultimately, it's going to be a good pro for the O-line to go in there and dominate. And at least DiNucci will know he's taking more than probably just a series of snaps like he thought. He took 2.5 quarters. So it's interesting to see what the Bills do here at this quarterback position, because it's a tightrope. But ultimately, I just don't think you can play Josh. There is some benefit there. I just bring it into the regular season with one quarter. I don't think one quarter plus 2 quarters against the Panthers is really going to matter. I'm sorry.
Right.
I
agree. And I think, pregame, I said defensively, can the front four create pressure? They did that. And can the Bills O-line create space for the RBs to gain more than 40 yards like they did against the Bears? They did that. I wanted to also see the exchange between Allen and McGovern stay clean in wet conditions. Obviously, we didn't get to see that because Allen didn't play, but McGovern still did well with Trubisky, even though, it may have been a little bit wet there, although the field was said to be in decent shape after the rains close to kickoff.
It did look decent.
Overall, everything that I kind of was hoping to see, like you had mentioned, was, D-line, offensive line for me. And we saw both of those things really, and even surprised a little bit because Gregory Rousseau just looked like absolute force out there. And if we're going to get that game in and game out from him, then that whole D line conversation changes a lot. And if we only need to keep 5 D linemen or defensive ends, then I'm a little bit more on board if we get that Greg Rousseau every week.
Yeah, for sure.
So overall, if you haven't done so yet, smash the like. If you're on YouTube, please give it a share. Facebook, share and like, and then on X, give it a repost and a like there as well. Get us moved up the algorithms. Appreciate all the comments tonight as well. And then, Kevin, I'll give you a chance here if you have anything more you want to say before we get out of here.
Yeah, appreciate the 600 live viewers as we speak. That's always really appreciate the comments. That's always cool. And yeah, like I just ultimately think this is the kind of preseason performance that you're hoping for. Like you would expect a team of the Bills' caliber to dominate in the trenches, and they did. And that's what you can hope for. Is I've been touting that I think the Bills' O-line is really good. I think you saw that tonight. And I think the Bills' defensive front 7 specifically, and now even their back, their corners. So I mean, really everything but whoever's next to Rapp, ultimately. And I'm still not that worried when you have Cole Bishop. It doesn't seem to be like an injury. Like I think he can be ready soon. And Mike Adware, like there's just like I just think that they're going to have a safety. But ultimately, the defense, like that's what you're going to expect to see, especially if you have some young, spry guys like that can get after it. And we saw that with Solomon. Even Kingsley Jonathan gets in there late in games like he always does. Greg Rousseau, what he's able to do, the pressure in the interior side, what can Dwayne Carter do? They definitely had some penetration there. And ultimately pretty impressed by the defense as a whole. And they were good last week. I mean, the backup units were in pretty early against some of their starters. Like, they were playing DJ Moore pretty late in the game, in my opinion, for what was a preseason
Right.
game one.
Yeah.
And
They said they even game planned a little bit. And I mean, it's obviously
they
like,
were running stunts, man. Eric Washington knew what he was doing. Like, so I mean, that's fine. You can approach it however you want. I think that it's a little bit like Eric Washington got that defensive coordinator job, felt pretty spurned by Sean McDermott picking Bobby Babbitt Jr. Pretty clearly for that defensive coordinator position. But the game planning was a little bit ridiculous, in my opinion. And the Bills kind of were just like, whatever. So good for them. Their preseason champs are 3-0. They're going to go beat the Bengals, Bills, and Chiefs next week, probably to run the AFC trifecta. So that's how they approach preseason, and that's good on them. The Bills are just trying to get into the regular season healthy. And that was a really good performance by what I really like this Bills O-line, Lance, and just keep with it. Like, I just think that it's been a weakness of the Bills in the past. I just really don't see that anymore. I just ultimately think the Bills O-line's a strength, and I'd like to see one more game to feel pretty good about these number twos. I want to see the twos play a ton against Carolina, and maybe we'll have a pregame show next Saturday afternoon, or postgame show next Saturday afternoon, breaking down some of the same positives we see tonight.
yeah, and I kind of would like to see, Cedric Van Granger, see if he can. I know you mentioned stashing him, obviously, with Alec Anderson's propensity to be able to play the center and interior offensive line, but just with a skill set of being able to have Van Granger play center with Alec Anderson next to him at a guard spot, would really like to see that, come to fruition, and just rooting, given my excitement for the rookie and how much I liked that pick and the value it brought at the position they took him. I just would like to see that success right away if possible, but understand, it's got to come along and be at its own pace and develop there. So before we get out of here, I will just say thank you. Shout out to Monster Energy, the official energy partner of Built in Buffalo, another partner that came on kind of later that's going to do some stuff with us in the tailgates is Buffalo Belia Sports and More. So check out Buffalo Belia Sports and More on Facebook. They got a mystery box run going right now where they got 27 mystery boxes, and Allen, Knox Kincaid, a lot of cool stuff in there. So if you can go over to Facebook, check out Buffalo Belia Sports and More. Appreciate that. And as always, Kevin, appreciate your time. Appreciate, all of your insight. Great stuff with the team. And if you're feeling like you want to jump on next week, I'll be at the game, but I'm bringing my son, so I'll probably get out of there pretty early and be back here in plenty of time, and when we'll discuss that out. But otherwise, yeah, appreciate everyone watching, and Bills put up a really good performance today. And yeah, you want to take this one from Mike?
I believe it would be Clapp that they would try to cut and put on the practice squad. That would be ultimately, and that would be the virtue of keeping Van Granger.
And it's
I think
Collins
it's a pretty easy way.
has the contract, right? And that's why you're saying that.
I mean, ultimately, you can pay for Van Granger by not like creating more dead cap hits. So, like, I don't think that there's enough material difference that the Bills would be like, oh my gosh, Will Clapp played so much better than Lyle Collins. Maybe they will go back and notice that at some point through practice or other things, but I just haven't seen it. But that's how I envision it. But it was great being on the post game show. I'll look forward to it. I will be around next weekend, so hopefully we can put on another good 50 minutes of action that we can break down and maybe give some final predictions on if anyone played their way onto the roster, like we had a couple tonight, in my opinion.
Right on. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for joining us here. Lance Nelson, president of Built in Buffalo, Kevin Massare. Catch him on Wednesday night for the Going Deep podcast. You can catch me on Friday night for the Triple Coverage podcast.